Leaving my kids behind for 2 weeks. It's like, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah, movie making is glamorous, people.
It's
glamorous.
It just felt like a very nefarious situation, and I wasn't breaking any laws.
Like, am I a criminal? I'm counting money over a toilet.
And rolling it up into these little, you need to transport it, and you need to have it so that it doesn't get stolen on either side. It was crazy.
You're listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. Our presenting sponsor is the entertainment payroll company Extreme Reach. What you may not know about Extreme Reach is that they are already an industry disruptor in the areas of creative asset management and video ad distribution. And now they are poised to disrupt the entertainment payroll business. If you are creating content, you need them. Call them and tell them I sent you. Today I got to speak with Michelle Salcedo. Michelle directed a gorgeous short film called Piel Canela, boy do I not say that well, that she shot in Cuba, which is screening at several film festivals this week. It will be premiering at the San Diego Latino Film Festival March 23rd, as well as the Chicago Latino Film Festival March 29th and 31st, with a Miami screening happening the first weekend in April at the Indie Pasión Film Festival. So, if you are anywhere near any of those places, make a point of going to see it. I have seen the trailer and it is gorgeous. You can see the trailer on my website, theother50%.com. Michelle came up through marketing and editing at Miramax during the heyday, editing with Bunim Murray, and is now writing and directing full-time. She tells us the whole story of scouting and then shooting in Cuba, counting all her cash in a bathroom stall at LAX to make sure the TSA hadn't taken any, and her grandmother's spirit yelling at her about all of it. You can find us at theother50%.com for added features, photos, show notes, and the merchandise. You can also listen on Apple Podcast and all the podcast places. And I want to start making you aware of a new podcast that is launching next month. It's called Catch a Break, and it's the insider's guide to breaking into and navigating Hollywood. I'm hosting it, and it's also produced by Jeanette Volturno, Marcy Brown, Jessica Milanofi, Rick Osako, and Shirley Davis. If there's a chance you don't know those names, between them they have produced BlacKkKlansman, Get Out, all the Blumhouse films, Point Break, and the list goes on and on. This show is a series of conversations with panels made up of industry insiders and veterans where we tackle all kinds of topics, starting with things they didn't necessarily teach in film school. In addition to the conversations, we will also be giving away bonus materials, breakout sessions, videos, and samples to help round out the experience. Season 1 launches in April. Go to catchabreakpodcast.com and subscribe so you will know when it's live. All right, here's my conversation with Michelle Salcedo. Have a listen. What do you do?
I am a director, and I was an editor, and I was in marketing, but right now I'm a writer-director.
I love the way you said that. I am a director.
Yes.
And you just did a film.
I'm owning it.
That's good. Let's talk about the film you just did.
It's called Piel Canela, which is Spanish for cinnamon skin, which refers to the color of the skin of mixed-race baby. And it takes place in Cuba, and I shot it all on location in Cuba, which was quite an adventure. I was very excited with Obama opening up relations with Cuba and the embassy reopening, and was very inspired by all of that back in 2014, and I started the ball rolling to try to investigate how I could legally film in Cuba.
Yeah.
So I have many stories that take place in Cuba. The first time I went to, my mother was born and raised in Cuba, and she left in 1963. As a Cuban American born in Miami, we weren't allowed to visit legally Cuba for a very long time. And during the Clinton administration, we could visit distant relatives. So when my uncle decided to go back in 1998, actually, after being in exile for 35 years, I joined him and I shot a little personal documentary. And I went for the first time and I just fell in love with the place.
Oh, cool.
I was 22 and I just was blown away. It was nothing like Miami. It was everything that my family had. I thought they were exaggerating when they were saying the tallest palm trees in the world, the most beautiful landscape, and it was all true, and it was just fantastic. And it was right there in the backyard, 90 miles away, like just...
Because it's so close.
It's so close.
It's a whole different world.
It's bizarre to grow up being Cuban American and knowing that this it's 777 miles long. All of this land that you just want to explore is right there, but you can't go. So I didn't want to go as a tourist. I couldn't go as a tourist anyway, but for family reasons and political reasons, I didn't want to go as a tourist. But when my uncle went, it was a great opportunity for me to get to know the island and I stayed there for 14 days and I just fell in love with the place. I went to the beach, I went to the countryside, I went to a tiny little farm town where my family's from. And then it just started inspiring my stories for 20 years. And I worked on in many different areas of film. I worked in film. I wasn't quite a filmmaker. I went to film school, but so 20 years later, I decided that's it. I'm just going to self-finance this first film, because if I don't put my money where my mouth is and prove this is what I can do, who else can trust me to do that or trust me with their money? So I said, this is it. This is my one chance.
So you wrote it?
I wrote it, yes. And this is something I had been inspired many years ago by my mom's immigration story and my father's immigration story, and their experience here, and sort of that longing and nostalgia for a connection that they left behind. Although the story is not entirely biographical, it's also actually inspired by my husband's birth story, because he's adopted. And this is, the movie is about giving up a child, and it's about a love child. So it's about an exile that returns to Cuba after being in exile for 20 years to find the daughter that she left behind.
Oh, I just got chill bumps.
So it's basically, my husband was adopted. His birth mother's story was when she was 16, she gave him up for adoption, and he wanted to find her. So 50 years after he was given up for adoption, they reunited. Wow. And I was part of that whole experience, because this was when we were getting married, and she was part of the wedding, and we had never met her. And so I experienced that whole story. So I decided to retell that story, change it a little bit, but set it in that world that I was so obsessed with. And also the longing for a child was became that nostalgia that my mom had for her motherland, if you will. Yeah. So it just fell in nicely. And it was very, very exciting. So I was, it's also, this short film is part of a feature that I wrote. So this is all the backstory of the lead protagonist, which is this immigrant woman from Cuba who is longing for this connection back to her past. And then you realize as time passes by that it's a daughter that she left behind. So it takes place in two time periods, in 1980 and 1958. So in 1980, there's a big Mariel boat lift, which is basically the first time in 20 years that Cubans are allowed to return back after the first wave of exiles in the late 50s and early 60s. So the short Piel Canela opens up in 1980, when Cuban Americans are for the first time in 20 years allowed to go back. And our lead character, Veronica, goes back to Cuba and starts looking for her daughter. And then the film takes you back, flashbacks that you are able to witness her love story, and it takes you to the countryside in 1958. So it's a period piece that takes place in 1980 and 1958, shot in a communist country that we have little access to. So why not for my first project, right? So.
That sounds easy. So how did you do that?
So I did a lot of research. I love this film called Una Noche, and which was a feature that was shot in Cuba on film, Lucy Malloy's film. And I just thought it was beautifully done. And so I researched who produced that, and it so happened to be that one of the executive producers I worked with on a TV show knew him personally, and we were connected
handy.
Through her. I had basically asked all of my Cuban-American film professionals and people who weren't just networking, trying to see who knew who, and he was a great guy, and he really helped me. So we spoke on the phone, we really hit it off. I said, this is just a short film, very, very low budget, I'm self-financing everything. He's like, no problem, I know guerrilla style. He went to film school in Cuba, he knows everybody in Cuba. He lives in South Florida now, and he's been there for about 6 years. So the two of us took our initial trip to Cuba back in 2017, and we met for the first time in Cuba. And he flew from South Florida, I flew from Los Angeles, and we met in Cuba at the hotel lobby, which also was our makeshift office. And the Habana Libre. And I stayed with my cousins, distant cousins, who I'd met 20 years prior when I shot the documentary. And it was a great experience because he knew everybody. And I'm fluent in Spanish because I'm a native speaker. My mother only spoke to me in Spanish, and my accent is pretty good. It won't pass for a native Cuban born. They're very, very specific. I have a Miami Cuban. It's such a subtle difference. But boy, do they pick up on that immediately.
They'll tell you about it.
So, yeah. And sometimes they're always like, what region are you from? And I'm like, well, my mom was born in Kivican. It's like, yeah, well, where were you born? It's like, Miami. A little 90 miles north or 150 miles north of. But it was great because he gave me this access to so many people that I wouldn't normally have. And we just rented a car. We hired a driver, and I did all this research before, and I went on every hipster's Instagram for location scouting. I just scoured the pages of Airbnb and to see if any of the places we could stay could double as locations.
That's really smart.
And it actually really works because there's so many great pictures, and I mean, you really could just, and the owners of the homes are very accessible, and it actually helps them with advertising. Like they might be totally open to allowing you to shoot a short film in their home because it also helps. Like, oh, it's
in a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great.
So it helps their business. So that was great, and that worked out nicely. But mostly it takes place in the countryside. All the love story in 1958 takes place like in a very, very rural area. So I had all these like great hipster Instagram posts of these beautiful countryside homes, and I had them all on my iPad. The thing is with traveling to Cuba, there's no ATMs, no credit cards, no internet, no phone service. So it's really going back in time, 20 years.
It's not just the cars that
no,
look like
it's not just the cars. No, so things are changing now. People have phone service, but you can't, because of the blockade, you can't use your American cell phone. You can under emergencies, but it's just really, really expensive, like $6 a minute more, just prohibitively expensive. And you can't use your American carriers. Like you could get a burner phone while you're in Cuba. I had one.
Do they have landlines?
They do have landlines.
Okay, just not cell service.
They have cell service. It's just very spotty.
Yeah.
And you have to, it doesn't work. They don't have free Wi-Fi anywhere. And you have to sort of do a prepay on your phone, and a lot of people are constantly running out.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to get a hold of people. It's changing very rapidly. But even in 2017, it was just very difficult to communicate with people, and you really have to set meeting places, and it's very difficult. You have to carry cash because none of our bank cards work because of the blockade, and none of our credit cards work. So you have to really.
So it's like going back 30 years, really.
Yeah, or I don't even know, because when I traveled in Europe 20 years ago, I had cash cards and credit cards.
Yeah,
and
true.
it's quite a challenge, which was a challenge for pre-production, but became even more of a challenge for production. And I'll get to that in a second.
Were you just strapping cash to your body?
I did. Yes, I did. So the pre-production, because he spoke Spanish with the Cuban accent, he would always lead. And we basically hired a driver, and we're in the middle of the countryside, and opened up the van and talked to a local and said, hey, you want to come with us? Because we're looking for some locations. And the guy's like, okay, sure. So he totally trusted us, jumped in the van with us because we were fellow Cubans. And I showed him the pictures. It's like, here's a countryside home. Do you know this kind? Oh yeah, that's Monguito's countryside. I'll take you there right.
You're showing him pictures and asking him to identify the locations and take you there?
Absolutely.
Amazing.
So that hipster Instagram post, and I don't even know whose it was, led me to this beautiful, tiny little countryside, way off the beaten track, it's not touristy at all. And he said, this is Monguito's house. And I was able to speak to him. He's like, we were shooting a film, and he opened always. And I said, yes, my mother was born here. And they're like, sure, no problem.
Amazing.
Sure, no problem. And he said, well, I'm going to paint my house. I'm like, well, it looks great now. Do you think you'd hold off? But he's like, and he's like, sure, I'd love to be part of it. And I will hold off. And they were just so welcoming, and that is how we did the location scouting. And we did a little bit of casting locally, because I wanted to mix a few non-actors with actors.
And did you bring your cast with you mostly?
No, I cast it all in Cuba. So
even your leads?
Yes, except for the one lead who's Cuban American. So I had a cast of about 10, I believe, and including small parts, but my lead is she's Cuban American. So the person who is the Cuban American returning to Cuba is played by a Cuban American. It was very important for me to be as authentic as possible.
Yeah. So is it in Spanish?
It's all in Spanish, yes. It's subtitled in English. And we also did a casting call. When I showed up to the casting office, it was they had these tiny little computers from the 90s. I could not believe this database. And people had there were no headshots for these actors. Maybe one person had a professional headshot. Everything else was a selfie, or not even a selfie, just a bad picture being taken.
Their database is in DOS, orange screen.
It was crazy. Floppy disks. When we tried to print the script for my casting call, there was no paper. And then so I actually had to borrow some legal-sized giant paper from my cousin, who happened to have it at his house left over. And when we used that paper to print on this ancient printing machine, it started smoking.
Oh my God. Was it like a dot matrix? Like,
It was some sort of I don't know what it was. It was just smoking, and I was terrified because I was like, I don't want to come here and break these things.
This isn't right.
This is just not. And he was pretty embarrassed. But, by the end of it, we managed to print a couple of scripts. That's all we needed. And I did a casting call. It was pouring rain. But 60 people showed up.
Wow.
Which was amazing. So throughout these pictures, I was able to at least identify who I wanted to call in. So we called in, and it was pouring rain, and I was really nervous about it because transportation is terrible. We didn't have where I was casting was all windows, just a nightmare for shooting. They didn't have a screen or anything. We hung up a giant sheet, and we did the casting call like that. It was just so loud with all the diesel engines coming by, but we still managed to do it. And I was very happy especially with Pedrito Martinez, who plays the romantic lead. He was just spot on, exactly what I needed. And it was just an incredible feeling to finally have what I had written come to life before my eyes. And because you write something and you're thinking in this like regional, very like authentic Cuban, and then to have the actual Cubans from those regions, he happens to be from the small countryside, perform those lines, it comes to life in a way
amazing.
It was just a dream come true. It's the best professional experience I've ever had. So the casting went great. I had my locations. I wasn't able to get an interior, but I had for one of these apartment scenes, but I had a good Airbnb picture in mind. So I was like, okay, we'll find that one later. I got all my exteriors. We've just knocked on a lot of doors. We must have walked 10 miles one day in Havana and just knocked on doors and looked, and it was just a wonderful experience. The two of us had such a great time. And then he had a lot of relationships with crew. So we were able to do, and it's a tiny crew. I didn't even have an assistant director. It was just basically a camera assistant, a sound person, because you can't bring sound equipment into Cuba because there's still Cold War era paranoia. And they will think you're a spy if you bring any sort of lav or any sort of audio recording. So they're very, very strict about that. They will not allow you to bring any audio recording equipment.
But do they have equipment there?
They do. And the money exchange is so... they make so little money over there that for not so much. For the same rate that you would pay someone who's starting out here, you would get the top audio guy there. Mm-hmm. So I was all about not taking advantage of the fact that I could get them for less. I was more about getting the top people at their rate that they would get for a feature.
Yeah.
And that way they would drop my audio guy had an offer to do a feature, but he really loved the story. It was unlike anything that he had read before because it's from the exiles sort of viewpoint. And then they have their own internal, they're not as obsessed as us outsiders or us exiled community with the whole going back story. So it hasn't really been done. A lot of stories are done about leaving, but not a lot about returning. Yeah. So it was unique in that. And also they were very interested in this Cuban-American actress that I had brought and sort of her experiences because she grew up in Cuba until she was like 3 and then she moved to Miami. So she just is so passionate about Cuba. So they just were very, very excited to work on the project. So everything is set in place and all I need are my permits and I'm good to go. I was there for 5 days, come back, and we had set to start shooting in a few months. Permits don't come in. And Trump takes over the administration after Obama and he decides to change a lot of our policies with Cuba. So
Trump happened in the middle of you've prepped, but you haven't got to shoot yet.
But I haven't got my permits. So Trump happens and that delays everything because all of a sudden Cuba now becomes, the Cubans become a little paranoid and they become a little bit suspicious and of course upset because he's decided to turn back all of these policies that Obama promised, all of these like new relationships, and everyone all of a sudden fixed up their houses, set up these Airbnbs for all the American tourists to come, and then he puts a freeze on the relationships, and that affects all the artists and everything that's going on because we were able to secure under the there's two sides to the visas. There's the visas that you need from the American side and then the Cuban permits to actually shoot. Right. So it's very, very complicated. And
did you have the visas in place?
I did because of Obama, there's 12 categories of legal travel, and included in those are educational activities and professional research, which this short film falls under, and because I actually took 2 directors of photography from here. I had worked on a documentary that was shot in Africa by a couple award-winning cinematographers, and I worked on that. I didn't charge them to edit because it was a passion project of theirs, and I sort of was bartering on them returning a favor and shooting, and they really wanted to go to Cuba. So they said, as soon as you're ready, we're there. And one is Robert Primes, who was a professor at AFI.
Oh, handy.
For many years. And he's an excellent cinematographer, board member of the ASC. Very connected with all of the technical, with all of the different companies, which were very excited to sponsor our film and giving us free equipment and so that we would shoot. And Canon was very, very generous and gave us cameras. So that was all great. And Dan Neese, who was my camera operator, is fantastic. He shot Mulholland Drive, he shot for David Lynch, and he shot Jackie Brown for Tarantino. So they were just super professionals and incredible. And I was just in awe and honored. I wasn't even sure they would actually do it. I mean, I was figuring on a favor. I wasn't actually that I would get one, and then
and you
two.
Got both.
I got both. I was like, I cannot believe this. It was difficult to schedule because with the permits and I had them on board. But then, but luckily it did all work out. But with Trump, that delayed my permits. They didn't come in. And then we're starting to push and push and push. I did my pre-production in June, July, August rolls around, still no permits every day. And all of these actors are just waiting because I had casted, and the location's a guy that wanted to paint his house.
Right.
Everyone was waiting and just anxious to do it. And I was just so fretful. And then Hurricane Irma happens. Oh. Literally, I had my shoot date scheduled. My permits still hadn't come in, but I had my shoot date scheduled for the exact week that Hurricane Irma, where Havana and half my locations would have been underwater. So it's a blessing in disguise that we didn't pull the trigger then. But then because of hurricane season and the way the rainy season works, we had to postpone it. So we didn't end up shooting almost for an entire year. Mm-hmm. So we ended up shooting in May of the following year. But all the permits were in place. I had to go through a different producer, not my pre-production producer, to secure permits. And this is a Mexican company and a different producer that is sort of a third party. And they facilitate American productions because by having a sort of a co-production with a Mexican company, it sort of makes things a little less complicated because they already have
production services.
Yeah, they already have the producers in place and the relationship with the TV channel in Cuba that secures permits. It's a little bit more expensive to go through that route, but it worked out and they did me a favor. And this was someone who had a relationship with some Miramax friends of mine, but also had a relationship with my DP. He's also a DP. So he helped us and he has this company. And he was shooting a feature at the same time that my short was going to be shot. So it worked out. We did get a sort of a production coordinator to help out. But then I said, I really am attached to my crew. Yeah. And so that was difficult. And he said, okay, fine, you can use your crew. Just use my one production coordinator. So that was fantastic because I was able to use the original team. With the exception of two sort of small roles that I had to recast, everyone else was still in place.
Amazing.
And they couldn't believe it that I had, and they just kind of joked about it. They're like, yes, you kind of come and go with the rainstorms. It's like, we really wanted to work on this project. We weren't sure. We kept hearing, it's coming. And then finally, it all came together and it was fantastic. So it was...
And the guy never painted his house?
He didn't. Wow. He didn't. He waited. And I wasn't expecting him to. I had assumed that he had already painted it because I didn't have his phone number. I just had the phone number of that one person who we happened to meet on the road.
That guy
that we kidnapped basically and led us to...
Get in the van.
Yeah, get in the van. Point out these locations. And part of the story was I don't know that much about the religion that is practiced in that regional part of Cuba. And I had a suspicion that Santeria was still very prevalent. But it was a hunch, and I asked him, I said, I want to make sure that I'm authentic and that I'm not sort of assuming. Do you know Santeria still practices? He's like, well, my mother is the lead Santera of our town.
What is that?
A Santera priestess. Santeria is it's a religion that is practiced through Catholic saints, and it's African gods that you worship behind all these Catholic saints. And what happened was when there was slavery in Cuba, just like here in the United States, the slaves were not allowed to practice their African religion. So in order to continue practicing their African religion, they assigned deities behind all of these different saints. So Santa Barbara is actually Chango, who is this African god. And is a male. So
from the outside, it might look like they're praying to Santa Barbara,
right?
But they know that's code for.
Yeah, it's code, and it's not it's not as veiled as you would think, but that's how it started out. So it became this whole religion.
I have never heard of this.
Oh, okay.
And I've studied a lot of religions.
Okay,
I'm blown away right now.
is so prevalent in Miami too that I'm like, of course, Santeria. You know Santeria. No?
Wow.
So it's a way to continue to practice your African religion using these Catholic deities. So.
Amazing.
So he said, my mother is the local priest. I just happened to be the guy that I kidnapped. But there was a lot of this. I felt, and here I'm going to get spiritual and superstitious, but my grandmother passed away when my mother was only 11 years old. And she had 5 daughters. And she's the only one who wasn't able to leave Cuba. So because she passed away before they all immigrated in 1963. And she passed away in the 50s. And I just always, when I went back to Cuba, or when I went to Cuba for the first time in 1998, I visited her grave and where my mom was born and where all my aunts are from. And I felt this connection, this sort of haunting. And I felt like very much that she knew I was there. And I was very focused on the documentary at the time, and my uncle was also processing, visiting his mother's grave for the first time because he had to leave, and she died while he was gone in exile, and he wasn't allowed to return back to say goodbye to either of his parents. So this was the first time. I was so focused on capturing this moment for the documentary, I didn't really pay respects to my grandmother's grave, my grandmother's grave. That night
she was like, "Hello."
Yeah, that night she came to me in a dream, which was really spooky, but very, very touching and powerful.
What'd she say?
She said, how dare you come all this way? She was mad. We were in the 1950 Chevy that in the dream that my cousin was driving us all around town, and she was livid. She's like, "You've come all this way, and you were just focused on that camera. You didn't talk to me. You didn't say anything. I saw you." And she's like, "I'm here. And I apologized. I was like, "I'm so sorry." She's like, just come back, or she didn't say the words "come back," but it was very, I knew. This is what I meant to do, is stories here.
Yeah.
This is just...
And she'll help you.
Yes. So her spirit was always there helping me. And there was a lot of production difficulties. Hurricanes, permits, governments, a little bit of this new producer that kind of got into the mix. She didn't really have the relationship with me or any of them, so there was a little bit of friction because they were used to working with the original producer. So there was a little bit of that, and she was very new, a little green. Also, it was such a tiny crew. We didn't have an assistant director, and that's tough because it's just tiny. But we had to keep it tiny because we had a company move within, and I was only there for 13 days, and I shot it all in 6 days. So, and I hadn't been there in a year. And so this was all based on a trip that I had taken for pre-production that was only 5 days long.
And you just hope everything's still in place.
Yes. A hope and a prayer. It was crazy. And it was also hard because I had already done all this legwork to get this one new person sort of caught up with everything. And she didn't have the same sort of, let's just, kidnap some random stranger and show him like a, Instagram post and tell him, where's this? That's not how she normally worked on her projects. So
now, wait, did you then meet with that guy's mother?
I did. Oh, I actually, during the pre-production trip, I met with her. She took me, after we had found the locations, and this tobacco plantation, also where it takes place, is beautiful secador, which is where they dry all the tobacco leaves. It's this giant barn. It's just wonderful, wonderful location. Then when I asked him, and he said, "Yeah, my mom is the lead priestess," and she's like, "Come on over. She'll show you her altar and her worshiping place." And I was amazed. I had actually never been inside of quite such an intricate Santeria altar, and it was very sacred, and she was so open, and it was great, and she was fantastic, and she just happened to be a santera that focuses on the well-being of children, which is such a coincidence because it's what the story is about, is going back to reconnect with this baby that the lead leaves behind. So
did you work her into the film somehow?
I did. Yeah, she plays the mother, the grandmother.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so she is the one non-actor that I cast, and she was very excited to play that role. And I just felt all this incredible energy when she showed me her altar, and it was just beautiful the way that she had all these pictures of all these children that she wanted to do good. It's a lot about different rituals that incorporate the different African saints, and a lot of chanting, and a lot of tobacco smoke, and a lot of ashes, and reading the ashes on plates, and the smoke and figures, and trying to sort of divine the future. And there's a lot of that. And so there's a little bit of that in the film as well.
Oh, amazing.
I just want to go back and shoot even more. But so she was great. But I had all these great pieces, and I was so scared a year later that they wouldn't be in place. But thank goodness. So going back to my first, one of the challenges, so I'm bringing in 2 directors of photography that don't speak a word of Spanish, super professionals. Because the one DP who's a professor at ASC, he was the DP on Felicity. So he worked on many, and he's 78 now, so he's getting older. And I was just nervous because Cuba's just not, it has many challenges, and I just was really afraid of anyone getting hurt I was being very motherly, very concerned about everything
so much
being
could go wrong.
Exactly. My lead actress had this one scene where she had to drive a 1950s car that's stick shift. She didn't know how to drive stick shift, so my husband gave her some driving lessons before we left. So she learned a little bit, but she still had to do a little driving scene where she shows up to the countryside to surprise her Afro-Cuban boyfriend.
Did you take your kids on this trip?
No. I left my husband at home with the kids.
Okay.
Because I would not be able to focus. I could not focus
Too much
on taking care of them or worrying where they were. So I really had to have a hard disconnect, and that was really essential for me. And I didn't take them on the pre-production. I also didn't take them on the production trip. It was just... that's one of the reasons too that I needed to make it short, just because it would be very expensive also to just be away for that long and have other people take care of the kids for 24 hours. But luckily my husband was able to do it. And I felt comfortable knowing that they were in good hands, that he could take care of them.
You could relax and focus.
And I needed to focus. And I just needed that. And it was so rewarding. I didn't realize how much mental time they take, day to day. So it was very, very good to be able to focus on being the director the entire time.
Because you're also not thinking about your grocery list and your birthday parties and your school and your...
It takes up a lot of mental space. Even if
a lot of emotional work.
Yes, even if you delegate it to others, you still are it's just a list.
You're managing.
So I needed to not have that worry. And also it was very difficult to communicate with them, which made it difficult. But then at the same time, it was better probably because I was able to focus on what I was doing. There were a lot of fires that I needed to put out. So I brought these two DPs. I also met a costume designer, which was a godsend, because here I am doing a period piece without a costume designer, thinking that once I got to Cuba, I would magically find some wardrobe and find some wardrobe here before leaving. And at one of these NALIP events, the National Association of Latino Independent Producers, which has been a great godsend in networking and finding other Latina filmmakers and Latino filmmakers, I met this wonderful woman, Jen Martin, and she is a costume designer. She's worked on really big films, Carol included, and she's obsessed with the 1950s. She happened to own some dresses.
Perfect.
And I told her the story, and she just fell in love with the story. And she had been to Cuba maybe 3 times before. She's from Guatemala, and she just fell in love with Cuba. And she's like, I'll go. I'm going to fly myself there. I'm like, I don't have a budget. I was like, what? Who is this angel? She's like, I just want to go to Cuba, and this will look great on my reel.
Amazing.
And she doesn't get the costume designer credit. A lot of times she works in the costume department, and there's such a hierarchy, and she's really so talented. She's done all the research. She knows how to sew. She knows how to pull. She knows all of this. She's been doing it for years. And she just wanted the costume designer credit. And so it was fantastic, because then I worked with my casting person in Cuba, got everyone's measurements, and I did a lot of costume research here. We went to Western Costumes and pulled all the costumes based on those sizes. And then my lead was here, so I was able to fit her. So we brought the costumes. Not a lot of changes, so we had to bring everything in a suitcase. So we packed everything that we brought with us. And that was a godsend, because she didn't have space to stay, but she stayed on the couch because I had already pre-booked everything. But I ended up reimbursing her for her travels and paying her for a lot of the work that she did, because it was just too much. I was like, I can't. You were so essential for this project to get done, and I found more money, and I reimbursed her, because again,
That's great.
So it was fantastic. So here we are, ready to go. I was bringing costumes, and we also had to get cameras across customs. We couldn't have big Pelican cases of equipment. No audio equipment, like I said before. It had to look like kind of prosumer equipment, and the reason for that is because there's just different tiers of production, and once you get the import-export taxes involved, it just becomes a different level of production. Like Fast and Furious, they shot the first 15 minutes in Cuba, so they sort of changed the way things are done, and so they now have a different system, and it's very complicated with the embargo. And the one system, in order to get the temporal importation permits, it just would have been too expensive to have giant equipment that looked like equipment. So we basically had to bring it all in backpacks to make it look like it was, even though we secured all the permits of shooting, this is like a whole different animal going through the airport. So we chose these cameras from Canon, which were great. They're C200s, and they're tiny, the body of the camera, but they shoot on RAW, so they have all this latitude, and they're just beautiful cameras. And then we were able to pack a lot of beautiful glass that Canon let us borrow. I mean, we had $50,000 worth of camera equipment that we got for free.
Amazing.
Yeah, which is more than the budget of the entire film. So it was really generous of Canon to trust us, and we got insurance and everything, which was also very difficult to get an insurance company. I'm sure you're in Cuba with the embargo. There's only one, and it's expensive.
Yeah.
So that was very necessary, though, because I'm borrowing all this equipment, and Radiant Images also was very generous. And these are all relationships that my DP had with Canon and with Radiant Images. And they were super generous in letting us borrow a Ronin camera stabilizer for all our roaming shots, which broke down really nicely into this backpack that I was carrying. And then my two DPs, or my two camera guys, had the lenses all just packed into these small, soft backpacks. They were fine going through security. I mentioned that I had to bring all my cash. So we have a limit of about $5,000 a person that we were bringing over. So I had to make the whole movie for $20,000 and maybe a little bit more that my costume designer, who was coming on a later flight, I could send a little more cash with her. So I had 4 money belts strapped to my body because I didn't trust. I love my actress to death, but she's always leaving her laptop in really bad places, and I was like, I can't trust her with the cash, and we won't be able to make this movie. And I already had the 2 men already had, so I was
and are you using U.S. dollars?
U.S. dollars, because it's totally legal to do that, to use U.S. dollars, to bring it over, and then you exchange it at the airport.
Okay.
For convertible Cuban pesos, which is a tourist currency, and then the Cubans use a different currency. It is so confusing. I mean, I could just talk. It's just, I won't bore you with all the details, but it was a lot of research.
It is a lot of moving parts to shoot in Cuba. That's what I'm getting. Parts,
and a period piece, and low budget, and. So I have all this money strapped to my waist, and then my Ronin, which is like breaks down beautifully, and it goes through security. My 2 cameramen are like already at the gate, and I'm with my lead actress, and then security pats me down and just says, "What on earth?"
Freaks out.
Takes all the money, which is totally legal to bring in cash. There's no law. I'm not breaking any laws.
But it's odd to have a bunch of cash strapped to you.
It's odd.
What's your story, lady?
Yes. And then also, when the Ronin machine goes through the scanner, it just looks like wires. It just looks very suspect.
Yeah.
So, and then they were gone, and they couldn't vouch for me, and I sent.
You are totally sus.
Yes. And they took all the money and disappeared, TSA, and it's all cash.
Oh man.
And I was like, oh my God, what, I trust them not to take it, but you never know. So I was really freaked out.
At this point, are you in the US or are you in Cuba?
I'm in LAX.
Oh, you're just going through.
Yeah, I had no idea that this would be the problem. I had all these anticipations about Cuba and the airport over there. And
getting on the plane is going to be hard.
Getting on the plane was the hardest part.
Okay.
And so I get stopped, and finally, my director of photography comes back from the gate and says, this is a Ronin, it's nothing suspicious, it's totally legal, there's nothing dangerous about it, it just looks crazy because of all the wires that are in the carbon fiber tubes, blah, blah, blah. He vouched for me, and they were like, okay, fine. And then I went through it. But then I was paranoid. I was like, did they take some money? Because my husband had spent the night before ironing all of this cash just to get into money belts. Because
so now you're standing in the airport counting thousands of dollars?
I went into the bathroom stall.
Oh my God.
Hunched over and started counting $20,000 cash in $100 bill.
Did they take any?
No, they didn't. But it took a very long time to count all this cash. And as I'm sitting there, like hunched over a toilet in a stall, leaving my kids behind for 2 weeks. It's like, what have I gotten myself into?
It movie making is glamorous, people.
It's
glamorous.
It just felt like a very nefarious situation, and I wasn't breaking any laws.
Like, am I a criminal? I'm counting money over a toilet.
And rolling it up into these little, you need to transport it, and you need to have it so that it doesn't get stolen on either side. It was crazy. But that moment I knew, I was like, I want to be a director. I don't care. Nothing's stopping me now. That moment.
Obviously, you are passionately committed to the cause, if this is what you are doing.
Hurricanes, governments, restrictions, none of it's going to stop me now.
Okay, let's talk about the directing piece of it. Was this the first thing you had directed?
Yes, and that was fantastic. Other than directing voiceovers, because I used to produce trailers. So I would direct actors' voices, all of the trailer voices, and then some ADR for actors.
So how'd you prep the directing part?
I did some table readings with my lead actress, and we did a little rehearsing. So I had 2 stand-ins. Another Cuban actress played so we did a little rehearsing. I also went to Film Independent had this a workshop for directing acting, and it was like basically directing actors for dummies. It was kind of a crash course, but it really gave me the language to be able to talk about motivation, to talk about circumstances, given circumstances, to talk about all of that, and I was able to have the language to speak to the actors to get what I needed. And it was a lot about, what really taught me is sort of a lot of scene partner work in terms of when you're in a scene, what do the 2 characters want to get from each other? And how are they trying to get that, and how are they trying to mask their intentions and all of that, and that really helped. And also the casting. they're very, very talented actors that I was working with in Cuba. And I just had a connection in the casting, I could tell. And we worked through the scenes in the casting the year earlier, and also was able to really tweak. And I was able to have this relationship where I was able to sense how they were taking my direction and how we were communicating. Because I think a lot of directing is communicating.
Yeah.
And just having this open trust. There's a lot of trust involved. And so I had that connection with who I had cast. I was terrified that I wasn't going to be able to get the leads, but I was very, very happy. I was undecided with one of the roles for the longest time. So I had chosen 2 people, and it wasn't until I was there that I made up my mind finally. But I don't want to give away the ending of the movie, but there's a bit of a twist, and I managed to incorporate both actors in a role. So I realized that was sort of there the entire time, and it just took me actually starting to shoot to finish that ending.
Now, did you storyboard it also? Like, how were you thinking about your
We
shots
did
and
some
angles?
meetings, and we didn't storyboard it. We did shotless. But not being able to block the scenes because they're in Cuba was challenging. I had been there, and I shot, I took my camera initially when I did all the locations, scouting, and I was able to revisit all that footage. And because I'm an editor too, I have a shot list in my head of how things should...
You can see how it's all going to go together.
How it's all going to go together, and sort of what are my necessary shots versus my, like, we call them cream shots at the end if we were going to have time. We didn't have time to do a lot of the cream shots, a lot of sort of cutaway close-ups. So we had to make sure we had 2 camera bodies that but we did not shoot 2 camera, and that was because between my DP and I, we decided that the best approach would be a 1 camera approach because we had such limited lighting. And it doesn't always speed you up to have 2 cameras, always. Sometimes when you're just lighting for 1 camera and moving pretty quickly, and then the other camera can be prepped for the next shot while you're shooting, that actually works out pretty nicely. We did that. So we had camera A was more on my tripod, and camera B was on the Ronin, sort of roving. So depending on what shot we were doing. So there were some meetings I had with my 2 DPs here in Los Angeles before we went, based on the locations that I had already scouted in my head. So there were a lot of just a lot of shotless and not as much storyboarding, and that was really helpful. But there was a lot that we did while we were there. So I was there for 13 days, and we did a little location visiting with my DPs, and we did a little blocking with the actresses on Sunday because the Airbnb that we were staying in also doubled as our apartment location.
Handy.
Because they had painted it this after the pictures of the Airbnb, and it wasn't quite as distressed as I want. But you win some, you lose some. It was still beautiful, and we still managed to light it so that I was very happy with it. And it opened up to these beautiful exteriors that just has Havana in the background live and just part of the whole story. And it's just wonderful, wonderful.
Where can we see this film?
Well, I am applying to a lot of festivals. So hopefully, as soon as I hear which ones I get into, please.
I do want to just really quickly talk about your background because you came up as an editor. Can we talk about that for a minute?
Sure.
How'd you get into that?
Well, I was an undergraduate film major at Columbia University. And when I graduated there, my first job was at Miramax Films in New York City, which was a great place to work.
And it was during the heyday.
Yes, from 97 to 2002. It was fantastic to work on so many Oscar-winning campaigns and so many wonderful films, so many wonderful filmmakers, so many acquisitions, international acquisitions. And I worked first in the photo department, then I worked in the trailer producing department, and as a post-supervisor initially. So I had a lot of downtime before things would lock, and then I was all night finishing things. But during the day, we had an Avid in-house, and so there was an editor who was very generous with his time and taught me how to edit on my downtime, and I ended up marrying him. He's my husband now. But
that worked out.
Yes. So then I was promoted to producing trailers. So I worked as a producer, and that gave me a lot of insight on how to put together short format trailers for all these wonderful films. It was just a great training ground. And so I was about to be promoted to be marketing executive, and I really wanted to be a filmmaker this whole time. I was just waiting. Okay, I'm going to be, I was a writer at Columbia, and my first screenplay made the first round of Sundance Institute. And I was very excited, and there was so much momentum, but I was working these super long hours. Yeah. I mean, I was working till midnight.
A day job will get you every time.
Yes, exactly. And so just time passed. And so I said, I'm not going to sign a 3-year contract to be a marketing exec. I really want to do documentaries and to do narrative films, and I want to do production. So I quit and I left instead of signing the 3-year contract.
Brave move.
Yes, it was crazy. But I had that documentary, the Cuban documentary that I shot while I was in Miramax. I hadn't even edited it. It was just sitting on the shelf, and I wanted to at least finish that.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine that worked at Miramax overheard this company, Bunim Murray, the guys who do Real World, they're looking for an editor. I was like, well, great, because I need money, and the pay was fantastic, and reality TV seemed close-ish to documentary, and it's not, but it was a fantastic opportunity, because as an editor, you're king in the room, because you just get tons and tons and tons of footage. It's so low budget.
And they were the kings of reality.
Yes, and there were wonderful people to work for. And I worked on P. Diddy's show, Making the Band, who had a little satellite. So Bunim Murray had a satellite, because they're based out here, but they had a satellite office in New York that they did just for this P. Diddy project. And so it was a great sort of start to my editing career. And so I just cut reality for 15 years on and off. Wow. And it was great. It was very creatively satisfying, because I was building story and creating these story arcs.
You're the storyteller.
And I was known for that. Producers would leave me alone. So like, okay, Michelle's good with story. Just give her the really one that we didn't really get a story. She'll find something out of it, and it's just, and also making dramatic stories. There's the reality TV comes in and becomes sort of a melding of narrative with documentary style. So it just hit all the right marks, but I wasn't getting any younger, and I knew what I really wanted to do. And that voice of my grandmother was haunting me the entire time.
Literally.
Yes. Yes, and I knew, I needed to go back, and I can't believe it, but yes, it's been 20 years since I graduated from college. But once everything clicked and I was there, and my actress was so happy to see it too, because there was a lot of trust involved, because she knew I was a first-time director. She's putting everything on hold, coming out to Cuba with me. But her lifelong dream had been to star in a movie that takes place in Cuba, and we met at a networking event. And I was like, well, my lifelong dream is to direct an actress, so let's get together. And she was super patient the entire time, and it's just the best. Mimi Davila, she's just a rising star. But she is wonderful. So she and I just were like, against all odds, and then it was time to call acción, actually, and and it just felt natural. It was wonderful. There I was, and
you're like, this is my thing.
This is what I do. And that first day was hellacious, because it was the driving scene. It was a 1950s car. There were girls running in heels with 1950s dresses down a very busy Havana street into a car. The rain was coming, and so we had to shoot around the rain. Then I realized that the guy's convertible doesn't have a top to it, so we had to deal with that. And then we had a tiny little company move to the countryside, to a different countryside, a little closer with, and then she had to do the driving scene. This is all day one of shooting.
Trial by fire.
Yes. And literally, because what happens is that she's in this 1950s car with my husband as the driver instructor, and it's the last shot of the day, and it's getting dark, and it's the middle, no lights on this road. And my DP is like on the ground in the middle of the street, in the bottom of a hill. And I said, your one direction is do not hit our DP. Like, make sure you hit the brakes. You're going this not very far. She's not going very fast, but you have to change to second gear.
But she's driving at him.
She's driving at him, yeah. And this was his choice too, in terms of, I was like, again, being the mother, I was saying, do you really need to be in the middle of the road? It's like,
this could have gone so badly.
Yes, but it didn't. Thank God.
Oh my God.
So we have, so he's at the bottom of the hill, and Mimi's at the top with the two other girls, and they're coming over the hill in the 1950 Chevy. She's barely, she's swerving back and forth. She's like revving. We have the person who owns the car, and then all of a sudden she doesn't go down to second gear, and the whole car just starts smoking. And I was like, oh my God. And then the person who rented us the car, starts screaming, my car. And it's just, she brakes right at the mark. We get the shot, and the car starts smoking. I run to the car. My Bob, my DP, and Dan are just like, don't go to the car, Michelle. I'm like, I need to save. I was like, the captain goes down to the ship, and it's like, it wasn't on fire. It was smoking. And Mimi gets out of the car safely. And then the rain had really done a number to these. And then these cars, when you open up the hood, they're just put together with duct tape. It's crazy, because what they can find.
Rubber bands and paper clips.
Yeah, and it's, they've been keeping these cars running. But the last thing I want to do is to break someone's livelihood. Yeah. And here I am for 6 days. I don't want to break this person's car. I felt horrible. So that was tough. And I felt so, at that moment, I did shed a tear. I was like, I don't want to break your car. This is not what I came here for. I'll
take all my cash.
Yeah, exactly. I'll replace it right now. And he's like, and then as I'm like talking and really emotional, and I'm like, what do I do? I call my cousin. I'm like, there's no AAA, there's no tow truck. Like, what am I going to do? And then all of this is happening behind me, and I realize they have just solved it. They hitched my production van to the 1950s Chevy. They had tied it up with rope. Like, this happens all the time over there. This is not a big deal. They like solved it like that. My camera assistant put a little flashlight on the license plate in the back and was able, and then he's like, I'm going to just ride in the car behind because it's nice and refreshing. It's beautiful weather. And a couple people got in the Chevy in the back and steered it. And then the whole production team got in the van, and everyone was just very gracious about it. And I calmed down, and my director of photography, 78 years old, he's like, welcome to your first day. You will laugh at this at one point.
Wow.
And I was like, and then I was able to wire $250 to this guy to reimburse him for him fixing, because his father ended up fixing. And the next day he was out back in Havana taking tourists and making, and making his money. And I didn't break anything. I fixed anything that I broke. I broke it, but God. Not for long. So that was part of the challenge, but it was fantastic, and it was just, again, a lot of it was divine intervention. I did feel that when things were going wrong and the rain was threatening, right when we needed to call action, that the clouds would part and it was beautifully sunny, and we would get these incredible shots. That we had all these beautiful animals that would just be in the shot perfectly, and I felt like it was the presence of my grandmother just helping me, and just saying like, hey, just take a deep breath and look right in front of you, because this is what you're getting, this is what you're capturing, and then having the blessing of the incredibly talented Dan Neese and Bob Primes to capture it. And we just worked really well together with in all those meetings and pre-production, exactly the style that I wanted and what I wanted to capture. We were able to communicate so nicely. And I had to also double as a translator a little bit because I didn't speak any Spanish, so that was challenging, but it was wonderful.
But you did it.
Yes. So now I have to share. I'm having a little private pre-screening at Cannes because for a couple of colleagues and people that are going to help me with the festival circuit. So hopefully it'll get out there very, very soon.
And then what's next for you as a director?
I have been writing for the last 3 years exclusively because I also stopped doing the reality TV editing because that was another day job. I keep getting all these fantastic jobs that pay well, that are creatively satisfying, but don't leave me any time for my own personal stories.
Of course.
So I said, that's it. About a couple of years ago, I said, I need just a 5-year hiatus. No more day jobs. I have 2 small kids that take up time as well, so I'm just going to focus on just writing and directing for 5 years and see what happens.
Great. How many years in are we?
3.5.
Great.
So.
And you have a film under your belt.
Yes. And I have a lot of scripts, feature scripts that I've written.
Fantastic.
And that is what I'm working on next. There's a biopic, a baseball immigration story that's really heartbreaking and very compelling and a much bigger budget. So I'm just trying to work. I really want to direct it. So I'm just trying to beef up my directing resume so that I can be interested to do so, because I really feel that together with my production team and with the experience I have with the Cubans on Cuba and the Miami Cubans, that I could really bring the authenticity that the story needs, and I feel that I really need to direct it. And then I also have the feature version of the short film, because it is a proof of concept, and I've had a lot of good feedback from people, from colleagues that have seen it, that they really want to explore.
I want to see it.
Where the rest of these characters go, and a lot of the story has to do with Veronica when she arrives in Miami and where she is, what happens to her life on this side of things.
Right.
In between when she goes back for her daughter.
And why did you have to give the baby up?
Yeah,
all that.
Yeah, all the more historical context and all of that.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Yes.
All right, what advice do you have for women coming up behind you?
Just to listen to that inner voice is telling you this is what you want to do, and just, if that's what you want to do, just do it. The way some things will happen for you once you set your mind to doing exactly what it is you want to do. Don't settle for, well, this is kind of close to what I want to do. Just do what you really want to do, and just walk through the door, and don't circumvent it. I mean, I think for a long time, as much as I'm very happy where my career has taken me, I think, sometimes you second guess yourself, where you worry about the paycheck, you worry about just the minutia, the small, with this month, what can I do this month? I mean, just take a broader look and think, okay, I want this for my life, and just try to figure out how to get from A to B. And some things, you're going to take some risks, but at the end, it might work out because your passion is there, and it's going to take you on the journey.
You have to be very brave.
And even if you don't make it, at least you tried.
Yeah.
And, you just have to give it your all and give it and do what you really want to do.
Wonderful. Is there anything else I should have asked you about that I didn't ask you about?
I guess what's unique about this project is the political landscape, I guess, maybe a little bit more about the politics now that we're in a situation where immigration is a hot topic. It's nice
I was noticing how we said Trump happened, which is a way we've never talked about presidents. We would say so-and-so got elected, but we said Trump happened. Because so many things happened as a result of that.
Yes. It just changes policy, and that has an effect that's worldwide, and it really affects many people outside of the United States as well as within the United States. And I think what I like about this story is that it's not very political, but it's in the background, and it's a story about reconciliation and it also shows the sacrifices that people make when they leave their country.
And the humanity that's under all of it.
It's never an easy decision to leave, and it's never something that is taken lightly, and I think that is sort of missed in the story, because the story always begins once they're en route, once they're already here, once they're banging on the door. And what's not touched upon is the incredibly tough choices they had to make to get there, and these are never easy choices. People that are happy where they are and have ways of surviving, no one wants to leave their family behind, nobody wants to leave sick parents, no one wants to leave a kid, and the fact that they do. I mean, my friend who left Guatemala, she had 3 daughters behind, and she just felt that she had to, because she didn't have any opportunity where she was. That decision did not come lightly.
Yeah, the question should always be, what happened before that?
Yes.
Like, let's understand that.
Sure. So this story is a little bit about that. I mean, it's in the past, but I think you have to investigate the past in order to be relevant in the present. So there's that. And I think what I like about this story is that it's about reconciliation. It's about returning and being at peace with those decisions that were made in the past.
Yeah.
And trying to realize that a lot of us are victims of circumstance, and trying to make the best of those circumstances.
Well, I am excited to watch how your career unfolds from here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really a pleasure.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Michelle Salcedo for sharing her story. You can see more about her film on my website, theother50percent.com. Special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on your favorite podcast provider and leave a review. And of course, on our website, theother50percent.com, all spelled out in letters, for added features, bios of our guests, and the merch. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms, and also go subscribe to catchabreakpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.